Unity's auto layout system is a very powerful and flexible toolset, but there's one thing missing that I've seen asked for again and again, which is something I myself need for my current project. And that's a grid layout group with variable sizes for columns and rows. Here's a crude example of a UI that uses the current built-in grid layout group. In this example, the text content of each cell varies greatly in length, width and height. Unlike the horizontal or vertical layout groups, the grid layout group forces you to specify a universal cell size, which overrides any of the content's preferred sizes. All the cells in this example must be wide enough to fit this text in the top right and tall enough to fit this text in the bottom left. While that may be fine in some cases, right now I'd prefer the grid to use space more efficiently. Drilling into the structure of this grid layout, we can see the root object has the grid layout group component with specified padding, cell size, spacing and other parameters. There's also a content size fitter component set to preferred width and height so that the panel will fit the overall size of the grid. Looking inside, each child object has an image component and a further child object with a text component. And of course I can change, for example, the number of columns the grid should have. Now let's look at some very similar content but using a variable grid layout group. This is a custom class I adapted from the source code of the built-in grid layout group. Let me just insert a caveat here. I am not an expert on UI code and I only found out you could even make custom layout elements yesterday, so I'm sure some of you can improve my code. But for my purposes right now, this is adequate. The code itself is freely available. I'll put a link in the description box. In order to use it, simply place the script in your assets folder, and then the component will be available to add from the layout section of the Add Component pop-up. The general principle of the variable grid layout group is to set each column width according to the widest content in that column, and each row height according to the tallest content in that row. This system ignores flexible height and width. Essentially, it expands all cells to fit their column and row. Okay, let's look at the structure of this grid. On the root object, you can see the variable grid layout group component, which is similar to the grid layout group with some minor differences. There's no option for cell size, and the constraint option is now either fixed column count or fixed row count. Flexible is not available. I'm sure it's possible to add that back in, but it was too complicated for me, and I don't need it anyway. Also on the root object is a content size fitter, as with the grid layout group. Looking inside, each child cell has a horizontal layout group component with control child size set to true and child force expand false, and this contains a single child with text component. A horizontal layout group's function here is to pass on the layout commands to its child to dynamically resize it. Without it, the grid won't function as it should. You should not add content size fitters to any object in the grid apart from the root grid object itself. This is a top-down layout system, meaning the parents control the sizes of the children. So content size fitters are going to conflict with the layout group objects. Going back to the root object, I can change the parameters just as I can with the built-in grid layout group. I can change the start axis to be vertical, and the layout may change significantly since columns and rows are now made up of different combinations of cells. In this example, now the first cell is stretched to the width of the widest and the height of the tallest cells. I can change the start corner so that the order of the cells goes from bottom right to top left. I can, if I want, set the root object's content size fitter to unconstrained so that I can resize the panel as I want. Then I can set the child alignment to lower right to move the cells to that corner of the panel. Again, I can change the start corner and the start axis. And of course I can change the amount of columns. Or choose to fix the amount of rows instead. If I want to add padding to the cells, I add it to the horizontal layout group on each cell. Here I've added a uniform 40 pixels to every one, but you could set each side to be different on each cell if you want. You can, if you want, go more complex than a simple cell with an image and text. Here, the sixth child object of the grid contains a horizontal layout grid component and a further group of child objects. Each of these subcells itself has a horizontal layout group component with control child size true and child force expand false. Again, this is added in order to allow the layout commands to be passed through to the child. and it contains a single child text object. Again, don't add content size filters to any of these objects. You can see that the children of the horizontal layout group can be of different sizes. Going even further, now the first subcell of the horizontal group is made into a vertical layout group. And again, each of its children has a horizontal layout group containing one child object with a text component. You can even add a grid layout group to one of the cells of your variable grid layout group. In order for this to work, you must add a horizontal layout group component to the cell, again with control child size true and child force expand false, and then a single child object containing the grid layout group. Each of its children here has a horizontal layout group and a single text child. Just to get silly now, you can, if you so desire, nest a variable grid layout group inside one cell of a variable grid layout group. Just like the grid layout group, you don't add it to the root cell, but as the single child of a horizontal layout group added to the cell. By default, each cell fits exactly to its contents, including the padding set in the horizontal layout groups. You can override that if you want by adding a layout element to a cell, in this example to the 5th cell. I then enable preferred width and set the amount to be whatever I like, in this case 450 pixels. I hope you find the variable grid layout group useful. If you do, please show your appreciation in the comments box.